Okay, hi everybody, and we continue. We are on the 11th program of the essays and externalization of the hierarchy, and you may remember, I just want to call your attention to it, in the last program, those really excellent definitions of love and wisdom. I don't know if I can easily find them. I should be. Um, I should be able to, I think. Wisdom. Well, let's see. Look at love first, I think. I'm just going to repeat them because they are, I read them to the faculty members last night, and they remarked about the excellence of these definitions. And so, no doubt, we want to keep them in mind. Love, esoterically, and in reality, is perceptive understanding, the ability to recognize that which has produced an existing situation, a kind of causal consciousness, you might say, emanating from the soul in the causal body, and a consequent freedom from criticism. It's not like we can stamp out criticism first without these other factors in place, such as understanding and the knowledge of how the present circumstance arose. It involves that beneficent silence which carries healing in its wings and which is only expressive when the inhibition aspect of silence is absent, and man no longer has to still his lower nature and quiet the voices of his own ideas in order to understand and achieve identification with that which must be loved. So there's so much to ponder there, really. It's marvelous. And then, of course, he ends with a little question, and we can ask ourselves, can you follow the beauty of this concept and comprehend the nature of this silent depth of true understanding? So it's much to be pondered, and if possible, applied to our life of discipleship. And we find that in this following definition, wisdom is based on that love. The love seems to come first. In other contexts, the wisdom seems to come first. Wisdom is the sublimation of the intellect. So immediately you see we're going above the concrete mind. Wisdom is the sublimation of the intellect, but this involves the sublimation of the higher as well as the lower aspects of mind. It's tending towards the buddhi, and the word buddhi in a way means wisdom. Wisdom is a blend of intuition, spiritual perception, cooperation with the plan, and spontaneous intellectual appreciation of that which is contacted. And all this is fused and blended with and by the love which I have defined above. All this is fused and blended with and by the love which I have defined above, plus that esoteric sense which must be unfolded before the second initiation can be taken. Right there is a big hint. So bear these in mind, won't you? And return to them, probably whatever page it may be, but, in the late 90s of this book. Maybe it's page 100, perhaps. Yeah, it is page 90 99. And ponder on this, ponder on this. Now we go further and take up our work for today specifically, continuing on page 101 in the externalization of the hierarchy. The early seeds sown among animal men, you see, we're having an analogy going here, how to what the new group of world servers will give birth, analogous to the birthing out of the animal man into the human kingdom. And now we're being birthed into the kingdom of souls. It's a very, it's just an exciting thing and long awaited. The early seeds sown among animal men were imbued with or qualified by separateness. This is very interesting. You have to learn how to distinguish the self from other selves instead of always being involved in that kind of unconscious or unself-conscious participation mystique. So separateness, a necessary quality for the unfoldment of self-consciousness, but one which must be now superseded. You see, on the horizontal pairs of opposites, we can look at separateness on one side and inclusiveness on another, or that in fusion on another. And although the word fusion has a higher ring to it, on the horizontal pairs of opposites, one is not necessarily better than the other. Sometimes separateness is required, and sometimes an amalgamation, a blending, a fusion of factors. Of course, that fusion of factors can sometimes be related to confusion, and to end confusion, all things being kind of blended together indistinguishably, we apply the separateness fostered by the fifth ray, which rules the law of cleavages, so that we can be clear about what we are beholding, what we are seeing. So I've tried to emphasize this matter relating to the cross. There is a vertical cross of spiritual values, definitely, and it ever ascends as the point of tension of our consciousness increases. But there's a horizontal way of approaching the pairs of opposites where you cannot say that one is better than another, because at different occasions, either one may be necessary, and either one may be the antidote to the other. I mean, like hot and cold. If you're very, very cold, heat is the antidote. If you're very, very hot, coolness, cold, is the antidote. I hope you see what I mean. So they have sort of equal value on the horizontal axis, depending upon the requirements, the exigencies of circumstance, but not so on the vertical axis, because their spiritual values constantly increase in intensity as the point of tension becomes ever more intense. Anyway, this separateness, which was needed in the beginning to distinguish in consciousness the man, the observer, the newly individualized one, from the environment, it was a necessary quality, but it now must be superseded. Domestic animals, their sense of self may be growing a little bit, but They may not see themselves at all as distinguishable from their other perceptions, but the newly made human being must see itself as a center distinct from that which surrounds it. Okay. The seed groups now in process of forming will be distinguished by the quality of fusion, and this should be as inevitable a development as is the separative and protective nature of the ordinary human consciousness. So it's like saying that the fifth kingdom of nature is distinguished by fusion. I think I'll, kind of put that in. The fifth kingdom of nature. Whoa. I had it in the wrong place. Typing. Fifth kingdom of nature is distinguished by soul fusion. By the unifying factor, or the factor of perception which sees the unification. And this should be as inevitable a development as is the separative and protective nature of the ordinary human consciousness. We see this fought out now as we approach the great conclave of 2025. There are people who simply are separative in their consciousness and do not see the rights of others as equal to their own, nor the value of others as equal to their own. I guess they suffer from a kind of a low-level narcissism, and in some cases, the narcissism is out of bounds entirely. The overvaluation of what you see as yourself. It is this sense of union and of at-one-ment which is the protective and essential characteristic of the fifth kingdom. And it is this latent yet actively present factor which leads unerringly and inevitably to the organization, interior and subjective, of the seed groups, to their radiatory activity, and to the magnetic pull they evidence when duly organized. That, you can wonder whether, given the onset of World War II, whether DK ever got to see the seed groups he was planning duly organized. Obviously, from the hierarchy, this type of organization was approached with confidence, at least with hopeful expectancy. Probably the latent dangers were realized, but they went ahead, even though it could be possible that in years to come, a second phase of the Great War would precipitate, and indeed it did, although they tried to stop that precipitation. So thus, they produce a fusion and blending, and as I say, essential characteristic, this sense of union and at-one-ment is the essential protective in that way, protective of the group and the greater spiritual values. It is protective and essential characteristic of the fifth kingdom. Well, we're heading into that right now, and those of us who are true students and meditators and servers along these lines, are hovering on the periphery of the fifth kingdom. In a way, from the time you take the first initiation, the birth of the Christ in the heart, you have, to a degree, entered the fifth kingdom. Maybe not as a full-fledged master, but a step has been taken over the line which separates the selfish from the unselfish and the lower four from the five. So, fusion and blending and the transcendence of separativeness, or the transcendence of that quality of separation, very necessary in the beginning, but no longer necessary, in fact, inhibitory of higher possibilities now. I'm here putting new ideals and possibilities into as simple language as possible. Just think of what a teacher must do. A great teacher like this, I mean, it's a bit like teaching the kindergarten, maybe even it's nursery school. I don't know. But so great is the love of humanity. He talks about loving human nature so much that he could be discouraged if he didn't love it so much, but he does. I'm putting new ideals and possibilities into as simple language as possible. I seek not to veil and obscure their simplicity and truth by many explanatory paragraphs. So his experience teaching shows him what he should do to come across the best he can. You know, when you read what was taken down about what the Buddha said in his various instructions to his gathered disciples, there is a profound simplicity in what the Buddha says. It's the simplicity of Shambhala, I guess we might say. What I have here said must be read with the eye of vision and the understanding of the heart. You know, sort of seeing ahead, seeing the deeper issues, using spiritual discernment to see behind the words, and heart understanding. Well, there's mental understanding, and we know that intellectual comprehension is a real thing, but when the heart is activated, there is a still deeper level, and a wise appreciation of that which is understood can occur when the heart is activated. Let's just say that true wisdom is not just a mental thing. It does involve the activation of the heart center, which is the organ of buddhi in a way, and we remember that buddhi means wisdom. It's one of its meanings. And interestingly enough, the planet Mercury is named Bud, and Mercury rules that that intuitive plane, you know, the Buddhic plane. So you see how those relationships fit together. Mercury is not just a mental planet, but increasingly a great planet which reveals wisdom, and the Buddha is Mercury. And is associated with Mercury, as is DK, just the way I suspect the Christ and Master KH are associated with Venus. And the blending of the Venus-Mercury energies is necessary for the disciples today. So when you have that in your chart and you've made enough progress to really utilize the types of energies emanating, you have a very useful indication. Disciples must have these two faculties as part of their usable equipment. I suppose the eye of vision and the understanding of the heart. And I'm remembering from the arcane school, there was, in relation to Agni Yoga, which was undertaken as a study. Alice Bailey was very inclusive in that way. I guess you weren't going to find Helena Roerich, a wonderful woman, brilliant and courageous, but she wouldn't be offering what Alice Bailey was teaching. In fact, quite the opposite, which has caused trouble today between some of the groups that are still animated by the separative aspects of the sixth ray. But anyway, we had a lesson set called The Doctrine of the Eye, and then we had one called The Doctrine of the Heart. Well, there are two eyes, except for the single eye, and one heart. And we have to move from the two eyes to the one eye and the one heart. But all of this in due course does and will occur for all of us if we simply persist with the right attitude and right fulfillment of meditation, study, and service. So disciples must have these two faculties as part of their usable equipment, and then, he puts it to us, have you got them? Or are you trying to cultivate and unfold them, my brothers? The eye of vision, well, I suppose it would be at that point the single eye, which looks into the future and reveals what must be according to the divine plan and how we can fulfill a part of that divine plan. Now, if you go to meditation 4 in discipleship in the New Age, he gave, 6 or 7 meditations there that he said would really hold us for the rest of our incarnation. You will find that the role that a person plays in the divine plan is contemplated. And I think we can never, we may know that what we're doing is good or useful, but we want to see a broad picture so we can really understand somehow where we fit in the expression of the divine plan, not to overestimate ourselves, not to underestimate ourselves. So have you got these two faculties? He asks, do you live according to the vision? Do you follow the vision? And do you have, as you do so, in all encounters, the understanding of the heart, which would mean that the energy of loving understanding would be with you. Sometimes it's called love wisdom. That's a little bit more austere, I think, and loving understanding brings an ability to apply love wisdom to the human equation. I mean, do we treat other people? How do we treat them? With loving understanding, and do we have the silence of the understanding heart? And do we care to sustain that kind of depth of assessment, of appreciation of the ones with whom we work or the ones whom we encounter? These are all questions for us to resolve, to answer, really. Okay, then moving on, we have here, we're discussing the work of the seed groups, and group work in general, and certain analogies that can be drawn between moving from the third kingdom of animal man into the fourth or human kingdom, and then moving from the fourth kingdom, now millions of years later, into the fifth, into the kingdom of souls. Another of the aspects of this group work is that its influence is pervasive and not at the beginning dynamic. It's in many ways it's second-ray work, and the factor of dynamism is related to the first ray, and all of this has to grow in an organic way and carefully. So a certain measured pace is needed, and we certainly have to have our patience as we proceed. The force which it later exerts will be due to constant pervasive pressures and the steady spreading of the group influence and ideals. You know, we're told about how the second ray works without let up, or leeway, and it is constant. It is not spasmodic in any respect. So constant pervasive pressures, and this is different. He sometimes tells us than the first ray with its periodic crashing forward through the obstacles at differently separated times. It is ultimately, therefore, this group work very far-reaching in its effectiveness, providing the work is done as indicated. This will be due eventually to two factors. One, the power of the groups upon the subtler planes of thought and desire, because there are higher levels to the astral plane, we know, and certainly higher levels to the mental plane towards which we aspire. And finally, upon, those higher levels, finally upon egoic levels, toward which Master DK enjoins us, even in an early book, Letters on Occult Meditation, and tells us we are not successful in meditation so often because we cannot focus within the causal body in the egoic lotus on the higher mental plane. But anyway, the far-reaching effectiveness of group work, if we follow the instructions. Now, it's amazing, really, how many people associated with Master DK as a student gave up on following his indications. And we have to ask ourselves, would we be among those who persisted in the right way and on the right path, or would we also find some alibis, some excuse to not fulfill his instructions? Okay, so it will be effective because of, first reason, the power of groups upon the subtler planes, and secondly, this will become more and more potent as we advance, and we will reach these egoic levels of apprehension, and we will find the various powers there, spiritual discernment and response to group vibration and spiritual telepathy. These are things we will find on egoic levels. And by egoic levels, if he also includes the triad, well, then there are very many powers with which we have to become familiar. And the second reason for effectiveness, secondly, to the activity of those who form part of the key groups. They will themselves form corresponding groups of 9 or 7 or 5. Notice the odd numbers, and thus there will be a gradual spreading throughout the world of an esoteric network. Okay. So these are the reasons why the groups will be effective. And he's trying to teach us how to participate in these groups, how to qualify for them, and how perhaps to form groups of our own um, corresponding groups of 9, 7, 5, etc. He doesn't say 3, but I imagine a triangle can be effective as well. But for this, the majority are not yet ready, but I would have you bear it in mind. True interest and acceptance of that which is indicated as essential to the disciple and to the work must first of all be patiently evidenced. So here he is writing, some 80 years ago, really, maybe exactly 80 years ago, 1939, and here it is 2019. But the group work will spread, and there are methods of ensuring its effectiveness. So, pervasive influence of group work. All right, I'm going to kind of lift that to a higher font, or higher size. So we are I'm sure much progress has occurred since this writing, and we've had an entire consciousness revolution, starting perhaps in the 60s and maybe going certainly through the 70s, and then maybe waning a bit. Are we still in the middle of it? Is there still hope for it? Well, there's been a great thrust in the expansion and sensitization of consciousness. So we have to present the material in such a way that to disciples and keen aspirants, a true interest and acceptance is developed of all those things that are really essential to the disciple and the work. So we might say, first, the acceptance of the essential. That is first required. I have used the word subjective a great deal in my writings. I think we maybe have a tendency to think that all that is subtle, such as the astral body or the mental body, is actually subjective, but maybe not. I've used the word subjective a great deal in my writings. I've done this in an effort to shift the focus of attention to that which lies below the surface. Well, in a way, it's the very first power that one encounters on the higher mental plane, spiritual discernment. Let's see behind the scenes what the soul is really doing. And I wonder, how many living things we can approach with our consciousness and see subjectively behind the obvious. There is the obvious man, it's the personality. And there is the man that is not so obvious and much more real. And this is the soul nature. So he wants to shift our attention to that which lies below the surface. This refers, in the case of aspirants, to the subjective synthesis in the three worlds, and not to the astral and mental planes per se. See, those are subtle. Those are subtle and not necessarily subjective. Subtle is not subjective. So it refers not to the astral and mental planes per se, or specifically to egoic levels. Maybe there's a type of egoic levels are certainly subjective compared with the subtle levels, but there are still more subjective levels, obviously. If the inner kingdom of divine realities, now watch that word divine, sometimes he may use it with specificity, indicating the realm of the monad and the logoic plane, and other times as simply a indication of a high vibration. But as he has explained it, divinity is higher than spirituality. If the inner kingdom of divine realities is to demonstrate upon earth, it will come through the emergence of the inner synthesis onto the physical plane. Now, the consciousness must be able to perceive this inner synthesis, and the perspective of the soul does reveal a unity, and as you move up the various planes and subplanes, we move more and more into a oneness, which reveals a synthesis. It will come through the emergence of the inner synthesis onto the physical plane, and this is brought about by vital recognition and an expression of the realities and laws governing that kingdom. So he's searching here for something more than just focus in the soul, but a kind of divine perspective of synthesis. The organization which follows the vision, again, you see, here we are with the vision and heart understanding. The organization which follows the vision is entirely subjective in nature and pervasive in quality. The vision leads to revelation, and revelation is of that which is always present, and the truly higher planes and the kingdoms which are resident in relation to those planes. The organization which follows the vision is entirely subjective in nature and pervasive in quality. It is a process of germination, but if that which germinates does not eventually appear in objective manifestation, the activity is then abortive. And we can see the analogies, in the conception of the child or the conception of any great idea. It's meant to have an effect in the phenomenal worlds and not just remain on its own level. So what we have here going on is a clarification. Sorry, I'll get that straight. Clarification of the idea of subjectivity, what it really is, and it is related to synthesis, a perception of synthesis, a subjective synthesis in the three worlds. Okay, I'm going to kind of point out what it's not, and then we can check ourselves as to the degree of synthetic vision which we possess. I suppose under the avatar of synthesis, the esoteric groups of the world will together achieve an ability to see, register the synthesis that is beyond what they can presently do. If the inner kingdom of divine realities is to demonstrate on earth, it will come through the emergence of the inner synthesis on the physical plane, because we live in a very apparently fragmented world on the physical plane, but more and more unification and harmony will take place on the physical plane, and eventually the oneness of all interrelated activities, their synthesis, will appear to the sensitive consciousness. And all this will be brought about by vital recognition. You kind of wonder, there's an etheric synthesis that goes on, so when he uses a word like vital, you have to think of the etheric body and an expression of the realities and laws governing that kingdom. Well, It's at least the fifth kingdom, at least that, and that certainly operates until you have the full-grown hierarchical worker at the fifth degree. Then maybe some kind of change of kingdoms is possible with the great decision, and one becomes more and more a planetary life. So, subjective and pervasive. These are the two words which are being looked at closely here. Subjective and pervasive, and growing all the time in presence and effectiveness, and the power to condition human thought, feeling, and behavior. So we want to avoid esoteric abortive measures or neglect. We want to conceive magically what must manifest and then bring it through for the redemption of the phenomenal worlds, which, really are the dense physical body of the planetary logos and even of the solar logos. All 21 lower subplanes are that dense physical body of the solar logos. The influence of these new groups is due to the close inner relation demonstrated through uniform thinking and a recognized unity of purpose. Now, these are all objectives for those who have been, are being welded into these groups. So let's just say objectives for those being, it's like I can't type here. Being welded into the groups. Unity of purpose. Okay. And here are objectives, yes. And it is for this reason, a truly scientific one in its nature, that I have emphasized so strongly the ordinary characteristics of the trained disciple. Because after all, uniform thinking, recognized unity of purpose, close inner relation, they will depend upon these qualities, these simple qualities, which he is emphasizing: non-criticism, sensitivity, and love. So it is for this reason that I have emphasized these factors. And again, we test ourselves, It's hard not to be critical when one is focused in the mind and one sees so many abuses. Sensitivity and love. So, DK really tried to get his the members of these incipient little groups to show these characteristics of the trained disciple. We train criticism out of our nature. We train sensitivity to appear, and as he says, if you want to know what love really is, ponder on love. Ponder on this. The influence, everything here is important. The influence of these new groups is due to the close inner relation demonstrated through, of the group members, demonstrated through uniform thinking and a recognized unity of purpose. Now, the full flowering of the seed groups is not yet with us. A beginning has been made. It was interrupted by a great war, and And I think the discovery by humanity of the destructive power of atomic energy was a real game changer. Uh, if we give credence to what Master DK says, that type of discovery from the fifth ray ashram largely was not supposed to occur until the age of Capricorn, some 2,500 years ahead. So just think of the prematurity of the discovery and how it could change intended plans and require that hierarchy address itself to evident dangers. So where, non-criticism, sensitivity, and love, where they are missing, where they are lacking, he says, the simultaneous oneness and directed thoughts and this group aroma, as it is esoterically called, though the word I am attempting to translate is more adequate than the above, become impossible. Even the sense of, it seems that even the sense of smell is involved in distinguishing the quality of one of the new groups. When things, even in our own world, when we deal with food, when it's been left out, if you leave meat out, let's just say, in the warmth, it's going to begin to disintegrate, and the aroma will not be an aroma, it will be a stench. And I'm sure that it is possible to distinguish some of the environs of the members of the Black Lodge, not by any beautiful, attractive, uplifting aroma, but by a foul smell. Moria elaborates on this a little bit. Very unpleasant thoughts, but they tend to, where their work is to be done, they tend to leave dead bodies of animals and so forth, just to promote the factor of disintegration, rot, decay, that kind of stuff. Anyway, in all we do, non-criticism, sensitivity, and love. So we're dealing with third ray, first ray factors in the factor of criticism, and with sensitivity and love, particularly with the second ray. I have not been interested in the elimination of hindering faults for the individual's sake, but for the carrying forward of the desired group purposes. He's always thinking in terms of the group, and the development of the individual in his groups is incidental, though if things go correctly, inevitable. The need is for group thinking of a powerful nature along the indicated lines, for visualization of the vision of such a clear nature that it becomes a fact for the individual. He penetrates from vision into revelation, the direct apprehension of that which is, we can call it straight knowledge. The need is for development and functioning of the imagination, applied to the lines of outcome and results, and functioning so creatively that the results are seen with clarity and must inevitably materialize. So these are needs, the need. Okay, and he follows that word with quite a few examples. Group thinking, visualization of the vision, development of the imagination. It involves also the holding of the inner subjective link with each other with such firmness that potent centers of force and of creative energy, working under inspiration from the hierarchy, via the focused minds of group members who are definitely en rapport with their souls and with each other, may function so successfully that the new civilization and the new culture can be rapidly established. And all this has to be founded. What requirements? One after another, wouldn't you say? All this has to be founded on the basis of loving goodwill and upon non-destruction. At least this is a building process, and whereas in the life of the aspirant or disciple, certain destructions are needed, as you begin to approach the fourth initiation. Rule 11, in the raise and the initiation, we have 4 types of destruction which must initially occur. But in this particular instance, which is better, destruction or non-destruction? Okay, well, it depends on the context. All this has to be founded on the basis of loving goodwill and upon non-destruction, as its methods lead to right relations between men and nations. And as its methods lead to right relations between men and nations, it is essential that the establishing groups should themselves express the subtler aspects of these desired virtues. So here, the need, many, many requirements. And I'll just, I'll just kind of underline the entire paragraph. And the words are group thinking, okay. And another word is visualization of the vision, let's call it that. And another is the imagination. And another is holding the inner subjective link with each other and I suppose with the inner worlds, and working under the inspiration from the hierarchy via focused minds. If we can succeed in these small group efforts, then it looks like a new civilization and its culture can be rapidly established. Always culture is a bit deeper than civilization, and there's an outworking from the high values of culture into the civilization. I think what Moria calls it sort of the cult of Ur, or the cult of light, or the cultivation of light. And all this founded on the basis of love and goodwill. Yes, and finally, non-destruction. So these are qualities which the improvement of the individual will lead to in a group sense. It is always the group that DK is thinking about and the contribution, for good or for ill, of the individual members to the success of the group. The emphasis upon the work which serving groups must seek to develop is that of an organized scientific activity. I mean, there are certain laws and rules under which each of these groups functions. And in his little books, DK gave these to us. We do have a book on telepathy. We do have a book on glamour, the second one. we have a very big book on esoteric healing. We have a smaller book on education in the New Age. You can sense that behind everything is this plan of how to present it. Not so much perhaps on political work, but it could be collected into a little compilation, well, maybe it wouldn't be so little, involving the desirable politics of the future. When it comes to the New World religion, it is pervasive, and so the number of references would be huge, but there is no, well, maybe we can say the reappearance of the Christ is that book that deals with the New World religion. When it comes to science, there are fewer of the references, but psychology is immense. There are 2 books, or if we really want to think about it, there may be 5 books in the Rays series, the treatise on the 7 rays. When it comes to economics, there are essays, such as In the Problems of Humanity, the essay on capital and labor, and the general meditation on money and its use. You can find significant references scattered throughout. The 10th group is the magical group, the truly creative workers, and we have that book, a treatise on white magic. So somehow all of these seed group areas have been covered one way or another, and some of them really voluminously. So anyway, the work which the serving groups must seek to develop is that of an organized scientific activity. It's not just an undisciplined, aspirationally prompted type of activity. They have to know what they're doing, and DK so often gives us some really scientific processes by which we should proceed. Look at the eradication of glamour according to the technique of light, and there's also a great meditation on the dispersion of Maya and on the dispelling of illusion. These are scientific methods. So esoterically, this involves the understanding of the basic science of occultism, which is that of energy. So these groups have a scientific basis, but it's not the science which is manifesting presently. It is the occult science. They are very Uranian in that way, with Uranus ruling occult mind, which can understand the occult science. The qualities, characteristics, and activities upon which you should be engaged are definitely the expression and understanding of energy along some line. I'm thinking, that he said the astrology book is his most esoteric book or occult book because it deals entirely with energies, and he's given so much out on the underlying energies. So the kind of psychology that comes along is a 5th force, not just a 4th force. It's a psychology that depends upon a knowledge of energy specificity and the effects of the application of identified occult energies. Hitherto, for the majority, force has been used and its impact on other forces has been noted and recorded as force impacting force, leading thus to forceful results. But I seek to have you as esotericists deal with energy and the result of its impact upon forces, and this is the scientific aspect of the occult life. Well, we've been living too low, he's really telling us, and it's possible to understand the energies of the spiritual worlds and how they are meant to affect the forces of the more tangible worlds. This is possible. So, this particular little section is one of the clearest about the collection of forces. And I just feel that I have to enlarge it a bit to emphasize it. He uses the word force so much. For the majority, force has been used. It's a directed type of energy, and it is originating in large part in the lower aspects of nature and of man. Force has been used, and its impact on other forces, it's been directed in those lower worlds, has been noted and recorded as force impacting force, leading to forceful results. I think much pondering needs to be done on that little, on this little sentence. But he really wants to bring us into the subjective worlds where the subject of synthesis is perceived and the consciousness is focused not only on the planes of higher mind, but even higher into the cosmic ethers. Energy and force are always relative. Energy is like a great pool a pool of high frequencies from which a force can originate and be directed. Force is emanating from the world of energy, but it's also possible to work with force simply on the level of the lower worlds. If I'm looking at some kind of sporting match, let's say it's a boxing match, the force of each boxer, combatant, is being applied against the other one. And it's force impacting force, leading to what? A forceful result, a knockout, something like that. We're not talking about drawing in the higher energies, generating a kind of force like the Shambhala force from the higher energies and directing that type of higher force into the lower worlds, because then you would have energy effects and not just forceful results. So when you look at these two words, they are oftentimes used with extreme precision and sometimes not as much. But we do want to at least be able to access the world of energies, and then we can direct from that world certain streams which enter the lower worlds as forces which can be effective in terms of what should be accomplished from the perspective of the world of energies. Okay, friends, so this is our first hour has elapsed, and maybe a little bit more. So this is end of hour 1, program 11. And we will continue. I'm eager, now that time presents itself to me as possible, to make as much progress here as I can. I think my record is to have 5 hours in a row, and I think I'm wondering if I ever did 6. Of course, the people who had to transcribe it and deal with it said it's just too much, but at least it allows me to cover some ground here. This is a big book, and there's not a lot of time in which to prepare it. So we'll go on in just a little while here, continuing with program 11. All right, let's go on now. So we're about an hour into this rather lengthy program, and we've been looking at force, okay, and its contrast with energy. A definite contrast in DK's mind, but sometimes the wordings give a clearer idea, and sometimes the two terms seem not as fully differentiated. The world is today full of forces in conflict. I guess if you look at a typical battlefield, that's what you will see. And in wrong relation with each other, and this produces the present chaos. I think we realize why one of the major themes within Shambhala is right relations, even right human relations. The new order will be brought into expression by the play of spiritual energy upon the forces in the three worlds. It's almost like a Uranian superimposition upon lower Saturn. Somewhere, I think, in the Agni Yoga books, it talks about the Armageddon being basically the conflict between Uranus and Saturn. And in this case, it's obvious that Uranus is representing the archetype. There are all kinds of degrees by which we can, or through which we can assess the power of Saturn, and some of them are very high. But anyway, the new order will be brought, well, you think here for a minute, it's like Uranus ruling the four cosmic ethers of the cosmic physical plane, and Saturn ruling the lower 21 subplanes of more dense form. In another sense, Saturn rules the entire cosmic physical plane, but this is a superimposition, in a way, of Uranus upon Saturn. And we think about Uranus, seventh ray, and the new order. The new order will be brought into expression by the play of spiritual energy upon forces in the three worlds. It's a bit like the etheric body and the dense body of an individual, but this is also true of the planetary logos. The lower 21 subplanes belong to the dense physical body of the solar logos, and the lower 18 subplanes for sure belong to the dense physical body of the planetary logos. So the expression is brought into expression, the new order, by the play of spiritual energy upon forces in the three worlds. And this will be the task of the new group of world servers when organized and functioning properly. All right, that's something really to, I think, ponder, because we do need a new order of the centuries, a new world order, and in an age when the seventh ray is dominant and the transformational sign Aquarius, we are going to get that new order. In these words, I have summed up one of the first and most important objectives of the group work with which I and others of the workers upon the spiritual side of life are at this time occupied. Well, I guess that means we have to enlarge the statement. Maybe when it's all over, you can have this to accompany your viewing if you want to take more time with the text. The new order will be brought into expression by the play of the spiritual energy upon the forces in the three worlds, and this will be the task of the new groups when organized and functioning correctly. So this imposition of the higher upon the lower, let's say the imposition of Vulcan upon the lower realm of Pluto, preceding the first initiation, and, well, DK has called out the significance of this statement. I've summed up one of the first and most important objectives of the group work with which I and others of the workers upon the spiritual side of life are at this time occupied. Notice how he deems himself and others as workers. And he tells us in parting one of his last statements to us, or at least very much emphasized at the end of an important section, work, my brothers, work, my brothers. So in these words I have summed up, yes, I've done that, some small understanding of the significance of these words can be gained if you will watch the effect that you produce in your environment during those times when you do succeed in living as souls. Maybe they are not as frequent as they could be or should be. Okay. So some small understanding of the significance of these words. We are imposing soul force upon the elemental energy found within the personality and are therefore expressing soul energy and are thus counteracting the personality forces in yourselves and in those around you. Well, we have to be the observer, you know. So often, perhaps around us, conditions arise which leave much to be desired in terms of unity and light and fulfillment of a higher will. But we have to be quite brave, quite fearless in our observation of the effects that we are having. How else than to progress if we don't really see with accuracy? So energies upon forces. And when I'm thinking we direct a stream of energy into the lower worlds, and in a way it comes in as a targeted force, but its origin is entirely different than the kinds of conflicts and collisions and fruitless action that occur when the interaction is strictly between forces arising within the three lower worlds. So when we speak and when we act, we can ask through our speaking, through our action, even through our thinking, are these processes arising from the world of energy, or are they simply derived from the lower world of forces? The desire of the hierarchy at this time is to fill the world of striving forces. Striving for what? Well, you can strive horizontally and downward as well as upwardly, can you not? With points of spiritual energy. Yes, there are many points, and they are shining with a dim light, we are told in some of the meditations. But they can be spiritualized, they can become radiant, they can become expressive of the soul and in general of the spiritual realms. The desire of the hierarchy at this time is to fill the world of striving forces with points of spiritual energy and to distribute everywhere those who are affiliated with spiritual groups and are therefore linked subjectively to their group brothers in all lands, so that a pervasive intelligent influence can ceaselessly make its impact felt upon the minds of men and produce finally the needed good feeling, goodwill, and good lives. Isn't it interesting here? He's kind of speaks in the vernacular, good feeling, the feel good, you know. a feel-good movie we sometimes discuss. You leave it feeling not depressed and not disheartened, but you have a kind of a affirmative feeling regarding humanity and your relationships, goodwill, and good lives lived according to the principle of the good. So this idea of distribute everywhere, now is a very peculiar sentence, because how are people distributed? Well, sometimes the cosmic magnet is at work and pulls you to certain locations so that the kind of distribution among disciples that he's talking about may occur. And of course, now we have a kind of omnipresence through the internet, and we seem to be able to reach each other wherever we are in the more tangible and outer sense. But it is peculiar wording, isn't it, to distribute everywhere those who are affiliated with spiritual groups and are therefore linked subjectively to their group brothers in all lands. So, so that the earth can be covered with the presence of disciples. And I suppose it is necessary also to work with those who are in one's immediate environment in a physical sense. But there is a certain, was it unexpected? I don't know, a certain pervasiveness which has come in through the internet, so that potentially any human being on the planet can be in touch with any other. What was one of those goals or objectives to have some kind of internet capability or computer capability always within 5 miles of where anyone would live. So it is a changed world from 30 years ago. I'm not, rather 80 years ago. I'm not sure that the internet was foreseen. Many things were not foreseen. Like I say, the development of atomic energy in its very destructive mode was not foreseen. It was anticipated to occur much, much later. So hierarchy can evaluate the trends, but they do not always know, because so much is dependent upon man's decisions, how the precipitation will occur. So think about your placement on our planet, geographically. What does it tell you about this kind of distribution? Distribute those who are affiliated with spiritual groups. It's a distribution of people. And we have to think, how necessary is this in our modern technological age? But I think it is, because, let's say, certain planetary centers have talismanically have talismanic activation along certain ray lines, and they are ruled by certain rays, and those who work within those centers can benefit from the rays and have the responsibility to distribute the present rays and the zodiacal energies which are pouring through. So I don't think the internet accomplishes everything, and I think that the group interplay which is necessary in the new age with regard to the new esoteric schools can only be accomplished by schools which allow the presence of each student to all the other students. There are certain energies that can be transmitted and shared which are facilitated by living in the same place, even though groups meet on the internet and can, feel each other etherically and emotionally and mentally and so forth. They can, but there are some finalities which are required by actual presence. And so I do believe that the new esoteric schools will become tangible in their locations. And but on the way to prepare, just many thousands, tens of thousands can be prepared through the kind of contact which internet provides. Okay, well, I think this was the end of this is yeah. So okay, I have to make sure that is not. Have to make sure that this is not bolded. Okay. And here we go. And here we go. Okay. Now, all of the work that we've been doing, let's just see if I can make this happen. Our recent work has focused on the communication from, I think, May of 1939. And certainly the clouds of war were gathering. Now here we are in September of 1939, and on September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. They had been given Czechoslovakia. They had been, in a way, through the Anschluss, they had been given Austria. And the Allies, Britain and France and some others, did not move on those acquisitions. But this was just too much, and it did signal to those who were attempting to evaluate Germany and its leaders, it did signal to them what kind of man they were dealing with in Adolf Hitler. And so the crisis became acute, and declarations of war were made, and France and England, at least, maybe some others, they entered the war. Whereas before they had merely compromised, hoping for the best. I think not everybody was hoping for the best. I think men like Churchill knew there would be no best out of this, but there were people who were of an appeasing mentality. And generally, when dealing with very strong demonstrations of evil, appeasement will not work. It just inspires a greater appetite for new acquisitions, new invasions, new aggressions. So here we are, September 1939. As Alice Betty said, you astrologers, you don't know when I wrote this, and the date on it may or may not be truly indicative of anything. So don't make too much of the date that appears on these communications, but at least I think we have the month correct. So it is against this backdrop of realized aggression that this letter is being written, and I think it was in 1939, later in the year, that the Tibetan decided to discontinue his work with the 10 seed groups, each of which, except for the last, was a group of 9. He had completed assembling 4 of them, and there was one more, the political workers, in which 3 students were chosen. And they were interesting, distinguished people working actively in the political climate. But he decided, the pressure of the war is too intense, and what I'm accomplishing with these groups maybe is not what I hope to accomplish. I'm just, second guessing here, but I do know that he established the group of 24, the new reorganized seed group of 24, and it is interestingly, the number of Shambhala, one of the numbers of Shambhala, the 6, the 2, 4, and so forth. So here we go. War has been declared. Poland has been invaded, and if you've ever seen some of those films from those days, it's quite pitiful. The Polish cavalry, yes, with their horses are out there in the field with German tanks. So, it was a complete rout and a complete conquest. And it was just, the beginning of constant conquests, no longer disguised or hidden, but somehow justified in the minds of the aggressors. We have to remember, how many earth signs there were among the Nazi group, especially the leading group, and, Hitler himself as a Taurus, heavily into acquisition of the raw materials of other countries, so that Germany, relatively deficient in those materials, could continue to wage war. So it was a very materialistic assessment of the value of the countries invaded. As a matter of fact, in the mind of the Nazis, the people were put down, if not as the Untermensch, the way the Jews and the Gypsies were, and at least sorely wanting in the noble qualities possessed by the true Aryan German. So the Slavs were considered to be basically a slave race. We can only imagine what would have happened had Hitler prevailed. The Tibetan hints at it by telling us the most materialistic civilization that humanity has ever seen would emerge. Humanity is passing through an acute crisis, and its karma or fate is heavy upon it. With regard, to the attack upon the Jews, let us say, DK says, well, I could tell you why this is happening. I could give you something about the origin of the problem in Atlantean times, but basically he says I wouldn't be believed. So he's not wasting his breath to give us the specifics of the karma of the various groups that were attacked by the Nazis. Being so close to events, it is not easy for humanity to see them in their true perspective, and it is in order that you may see more clearly that I write today. Well, the war overwhelmed so many. It was an immediate factor, extremely cruel, eliminated overall 50 million people were sent to the other side through the cruelties of war. Russia alone lost over 20 million people. So, we can see why a future war, given the presence of atomic energy in its destructive mode, must not precipitate. So it's to give you, a clearer perspective that the Tibetan says he is writing today. A broader vision and a wider horizon may help you to understand, and it may be of profit to you. Now, even though 80 years ago this took place, I think many of us were in that war, and this may be a clarification and a deepening of our understanding. A broader vision and a wider horizon may help you understand, and it may be of profit to you if you can be helped to see the picture as it appears to us. Well, that's what he's trying to do. Hierarchy sees it in this way. Are you close enough to the hierarchy so that, in fact, you can begin to adopt some of our perspective? That is the question being put to the people. So that you can be helped to see the picture as it appears to us, the teachers on the inner side, and also in relation to its background. It must have been, a fascinating and painful experience to be working at headquarters in those days with Alice Bailey, with the work threatened in such a way that it almost didn't go on. There just wasn't even enough money to buy the paper that they were operating with. All of the printing that had to be done. Supplies were short, and it seemed like a time had come when the work would have to be given up. Well, it never was given up, and probably due to the sacrifices of quite a few deeply committed people. There are two outstanding and important points which are present in the consciousness of the hierarchy as it looks on at mankind going through the present stupendous struggle, a struggle so great that the people in Agni Yoga, the officials there, name this struggle itself as the Armageddon. Usually it's seen to be ahead of us, but they consider the Second World War to be the Armageddon, the present stupendous struggle. So 2 points, outstanding and important. Okay. The first point is that humanity is today and on a large scale aware that what is happening is entirely its own doing and the result of humanity's own mistakes. That's very important, You can always blame these cataclysms on other sources. Men either feel responsible for what is occurring or they are shifting the responsibility openly and deliberately onto the shoulders other than their own. Okay, well, that is going on too. Of these endless and age-old mistakes, The Versailles Treaty is only the symbol and the practical focal point. It was so demanding, we know, so onerous, so heavy upon post-World War I Germany that it led to the sense of betrayal and privation, and the enemies who engineered the Versailles Treaty and its onerous demands were sought out, and they just happened to be the Jews, who through financial manipulation put Germany at a great disadvantage. So a huge resentment was growing there. But the responsible people, of course, saw, look, we have created this, and the more narcissistic people threw the blame upon others, but at least they felt that the human race at least had engineered this war. Now, of course, already the Black Lodge was at work. You can see it when you study the various societies that existed behind the scenes of the First World War. So already the Black Lodge was interested, probably from the time of Bismarck, in the later 19th century. He was considered to be an avatar of materialism and working for the Black Lodge. When you look at some of his innovations and ways of treating the public, you wonder, because there were some good things that did emerge. But he was said to counterbalance Lincoln, who was a true avatar of humanity and not of the counter force. This doesn't mean that Bismarck was a black magician, just that he was responsive to the counter force. All right, so that's the first fact. In other words, more and more people taking responsibility. Jung saw this coming, Carl Jung saw this coming, and in 1912, I think he underwent a nervous breakdown, or we'd call it that, some immense psychological disturbance because he saw ahead all the death and carnage which lay in wait. Okay, now the second fact. Now, how are we looking at these? Two outstanding and important points. Points or facts, either one. Okay, and now the second point or fact. And I'll just increase the size there so it stands out for us. Is that in spite of war and separation, of cruelty and of passions and selfishness running wild, there is nevertheless today more true understanding, more goodwill, and more outgoing love than at any previous time in the history of the race. Well, that's quite a statement. In the lead up to war, one doesn't think about that so much, perhaps. Well, let's see here. Yeah. Than at any other time. So the humanity is growing. Its responsibility is being taken. It sees. It begins to see. So attributing blame to oneself is a sign of maturity when the blame really belongs with oneself. But the second fact here, in spite of all these negative things through which the hierarchy can see and by which humanity is usually blinded, despite all these separations, cruelties, passions, the selfishness, There's more goodwill out there at that time, more outgoing love than at any previous time in the history of the race. That is a huge and unexpected statement. I say this with deliberation, and because I have the hierarchical knowledge available to my hand. Be not deceived, therefore, by the outer clamor of war. I tell you that men's hearts everywhere, are full of compassion, both for themselves, we could call it self-pity, and for all other men. Compassion for oneself, self-pity. But also compassion for others. The wide scope and the vast extent of the conflict is indicative of an inner unity and a subjective interrelation of which all are somewhat conscious, and which the conflict itself does not negate. Is this a hard saying? Well, when you're looking at the horrors of war, and indeed, I think things became even more horrible in terms of hatred and deliberate killing in cruel ways during the Second World War. In spite of all that, he makes this statement about outgoing love and compassion from the hierarchical perspective. So he says, is this a hard saying? Men's hearts everywhere are filled with compassion, expectedly for themselves, but also for others. And it was a global war, really. Even the First war was more or less confined to Europe, but look, here we have Japan, we have China, we have many more countries involved in the Second World War, indicating the subjective unity and their inevitable participation. So indicative of an inner unity and a subjective interrelation of which all are somewhat conscious, and which the conflict itself does not negate. They were easily pulled into the war because of their global affiliations. Well, he says, I seek to indicate to you that the basic truth of my assertions, if you will but ponder upon what I have to say with an open mind, not leaping to the conclusions we have formed in a hard and fast way previously. I seek to indicate to you its basic truth, if you will but ponder upon what I have to say with an open mind. The task of all aspirants and of all men of goodwill everywhere is to see that prolonged suffering does not undermine the present right and essential attitudes, and that the chaos and clamor does not shut out response to the voices or the voice of the soul, which has been speaking with increasing clarity for the past 14 years. So that takes us back to 1925, from 1939, and I think we can tell why, because the great hierarchical conclave occurred at that time. Now, if a war goes on for too long, the warring parties may become so exhausted that there will be degeneration on both sides and no good effect. He speaks about the hierarchy's effort to see that the war was not unduly prolonged. So this is interesting then. that all the chaos and the clamor does not shut out response to the voice of the soul, which has been speaking with increased clarity for the past 14 years. It's as if the great conclave of 25 made the voice of the soul increase in power. And despite all of the external distractions and difficulties, that voice kept on speaking stronger and stronger, and we can expect even now that it is speaking with greater strength. Now that we have seen more, the Christ is bringing the sword of discrimination, and we are seeing good from evil. We are seeing that sinuous line between selfishness and the care of others. It is becoming very crystal clear to those for whom it was a non-issue. The stimulation which was set up and the light which was permitted to creep through after the last hierarchical conclave in 1925 has been real and effective. Notice that we're not treated to a tremendous flood of overwhelming light which we could not possibly process, but a certain amount is allowed to creep through, maybe of the unfettered enlightenment of Shambhala, so that there is not the destruction of the forms, but their transmutation. That meeting of the masters of the wisdom upon spiritual levels, so where does it take place? It's not in some kind of room here on the outer plane. Does it take place on triadal levels? Does it take place within the higher mental plane? Because he says at spiritual levels, we know it's at least beyond the 18 subplanes where the conclave occurs. Within the purview of Sanat Kumara, who is, in a way, the leader of the conclave. So light was permitted to creep through after the last hierarchical conclave in 1925. Now, sometimes huge impacts and expansions of energy occur on the inner side, and it takes a while before they can be detected as precipitating on the outer planes, especially for those people whose consciousness is very largely focused strictly upon the outer planes. That meeting of the masters of the wisdom upon the spiritual levels led to 3 results or happenings, and these we are today experiencing. So what we have to have here is 3 results of the conclave. Yep, 3 results of the conclave. Now we're looking back and we see how important an event a conclave really is. And here we are in just 6 years anticipating the next conclave where, in all probability, the plans for the first stages of the externalization of the hierarchy will be laid down in more concrete form, maybe some kind of schedule established. We are indeed living planetarily and in terms of human development in momentous times. And it is a privilege, to be alive in the body at this time so we can really be of help, which is not to say that the help is not being received strongly from the inner worlds, but we're in the thick of this transmutative, transformative battle. We're in the thick of it now. And if we don't recognize it, well, I think it's the privilege very much of students of esotericism to recognize what's going on behind the scenes, and it is a battle. The Dark Lodge, they conceal themselves so well. Humanity may have no idea from whence these negative tendencies, but they are aided and abetted and fed and encouraged by the brothers of form, and we have to see how it will all work out. The day was saved in 1942, unexpected by the hierarchy itself, by the response of the Lords of Liberation, especially one of them. So we can't always go around hoping and thinking that the day will be saved by someone else. We're told that if we as disciples had been more attentive, and if there had been a greater number of us before World War II precipitated, it might not have precipitated on the physical plane. Okay, so two factors there are at work. Facts and factors. Humanity knows it's originating from within itself. The difficulties are found there. And despite all these difficulties, there has been a real achievement. And there is more true understanding, goodwill, outgoing love than at any previous time in the history of the race. Now, isn't that a dramatic statement? It pretty much gets covered up, by all of the loud precipitations at the present time. But be that as it may, humanity has made progress. Okay, so now we are looking at the results of the 1925 Conclave, and you can pretty well think of the move of the ashrams, of many of them, to the Buddhic plane as a major dynamic, and the formation of the new group of world servers, or at least the impulse of that occurring at that time, and greater interpenetration of the ashrams, less isolated focus on what they were particularly doing, much more interplay between the various ashrams, and the new group of world servers is an outer symbol of that interplay. So anyway, what were the results of the conclave? And the first, 1925, was a fresh inflow of the Christ principle of spiritual or true love, which is ever free from emotionalism and selfish intent. We had some of these things manifesting in the 1930s, and there were high points of goodwill in action, in manifestation, probably deriving from this inflow. This inflow resulted in the immediate and rapid growth of all movements towards peace, world understanding, goodwill, philanthropic effort, and the awakening of the masses of men to the issues of brotherhood. And, all the while the storm was gathering, no question about it. The real concentration of the seed of Nazism was occurring in the late 20s, even as these positive effects were occurring. But it's always the way on our planet of polarity. We are adjudicators between the pairs of opposites, and we will know what is the good eventually and what is the evil. The second was the stimulation of the principle of relationship, and this led to the growth and the perfecting of all sources of intercommunication, such as the press, the radio, and travel. Well, just think of it now. It's tremendous, this intercommunication. Probably in the 20s there, what we have now could not be conceived. We have instantaneous communication via the net. We can be there imagistically as things are happening. The radio is still, it's a symbol, but it's primitive compared to what is really happening. And then, what is the third result? The third was the inflow of the force of will or power from the Shambhala center. Can we call it a Shambhala impact? He's not saying that, but we are told that certain powerful people took this up without the energy of love. So this, as previously explained, is the most powerful force in the world today, and only twice before in the history of mankind has this Shambhala energy made its appearance and caused its presence to be felt through the tremendous changes which were brought about. Let us recapitulate briefly. I guess there's a difference here between a Shambhala impact and the coming in of the Shambhala energy. It seems that the impact is the greater, but let's see what he has to say. The first time Shambhala was active, and I suppose the monads were descending into the higher mental plane to create the possibility of individualization. The first time was during the great human crisis that occurred at the time of individualization of men in ancient Lemuria. Okay, so even the destruction of Lemuria was not considered a time when the great Shambhala force was making an impact, or when the Shambhala energy made its appearance and caused its presence to be felt through the tremendous changes which were brought about. Okay. The second time was at the time of the struggle in Atlantean days between the lords of light and the lords of material expression. Well, okay, these lords are called by different names. The lords of materiality, yes, the lords of form, the Black Lodge, the lords of the dark face. Sounds very much like Star Wars, doesn't it? That's such an archetypal series of films, and really tells us something about what we're dealing with right now when the Black Lodge is attacking, attempting to hold people into the slavery of existent forms and preventing the wonders of the New Age from occurring. Okay, so here, we're talking about the destruction of much of the known world, maybe in three different occasions, on three different occasions. We're talking about the floods and so forth. But Lemuria was destroyed by volcanic eruption, and it does not seem to be mentioned here. So maybe qualitatively, the second battle between the lords of the shining countenance and the lords of the dark face was of greater moment in planetary development. There was, of course, a Shambhala impact in 1825, and he talks about all of the humanitarianism which arose and the industrial revolution and so forth. And one in the year 1975, there's a crescendo of these impacts. And then in the year 2000, but there was, he doesn't call it an impact, a coming in of Shambhala force at the time of the Great War, and especially the Second World War. So maybe we have to distinguish between an impact and the appearance of the Shambhala force. Although, I think there's a certain amount of vagueness here, and we have to somehow discriminate. Obviously, Shambhala has appeared in its energy aspect several times on this planet, and two of the times were extremely destructive. The individualization was accompanied by a huge destruction of the forms of animal man, and probably a general destruction of the fauna, maybe fauna of the period, and certainly the period of the floods are, legendary in the human psyche. We have not seen such great destruction arise from 1825, although the presence of Shambhala energy in the Great War was a huge destruction. From 1975 and 2000, the destruction, so far at least externally, has not been so great. Okay, let's see a little further. This little-known divine energy now streams out from Shambhala. What is it? The energy of purification, destruction, and organization. It embodies in itself the energy which lies behind the world crisis of the moment. Whenever the will of God is applied, to conditions, you will have a crisis. It is the will of God to produce certain racial and momentous changes in the consciousness of the race, which will completely alter man's attitude to life and his grasp of the spiritual, esoteric, and subjective essentials of living. Well, it's the Shambhala force here is impacting the forms which preserve ignorance and shattering them. It is this force which will bring about, in conjunction with the energy of love, that tremendous crisis imminent in the human consciousness, which we call the second crisis, the initiation of the race into the mystery of the ages, into that which has been hid from the beginning. So we're preparing the way for the fifth kingdom and the coming of the mysteries. The destruction wielded by the Shambhala force is preparing the way, but it is accompanied by the great building energy of love. Well, even though my stubborn chronometer, has failed me, I want to say that this is the end of hour 2 of program 11, and I will keep this going. I can't exactly say I'm on a roll, but I will keep it going because there's so much to accomplish and so many things that we have to consider and assimilate and learn and assimilate and apply, which will determine what the Tibetan can give to in his third installment. Nothing is absolutely fixed. I'm sure there are subjects that he intends to cover, but the depth of them is determined by, how well we do in our assimilation and application. It's easy, to understand that the reappearance of the Christ is not a date. It is a condition on the planet and within humanity. And at various times, the Tibetan was allowed to give more than originally he thought he could give. The whole study of the 7 paths on the way of higher evolution, the Tibetan was allowed eventually to give more, and he did, and he didn't expect that he would be giving more. So sometimes permission is granted on the basis of conditions about which we cannot know, but also on the degree of assimilation of the earlier material given. So I think it's very important that we address ourselves in the right way to the wonderful material thus far given, in relation to which assimilation is very, very partial. As he said, I've given you more than you can ever absorb, but we can absorb it. I sometimes joke that the second ray has a particular type of pill, like an aspirin, associated with it. I call it absorbitol. Absorbitol. But absorption without application is incomplete and just lays up karma for ourselves in the future. So let us learn how to avail ourselves of the amazing material which has been given to this point, and let it affect our lives of discipleship in a profound way. And let us have a real type of concentration upon this necessary absorption and application. It's very important, I think. And then look forward to the third series of bridging treatises between the knowledge of humanity and the knowledge of the hierarchy. Okay, we'll go on shortly. Friends, we are right on the border of considering an important tabulation, and some things have come up which require me to call this program at about the 2-hour level. So I will begin program 12 either later this night if possible, or tomorrow. Meanwhile, there's plenty to study in what has gone before. We're on page 107. So all the best to all of you, and we will return. See you then. Bye-bye.